Nomine Patris, Filii, Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Nomine Patris, Filii, Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Brethren in Christ, laudetur Jesus Christus.
In secula.
This is Timothy Flanders with the meaning of Catholic. Jesus is King.
Yes, he is.
If you were listening to the sweet sounds of Vivaldi's Laetatus Sum.
Love that song.
I had a lot of people have been asking me about the music, and the music is always linked in every single episode. It's always linked in the show notes. So if you ever listen to the music, the intro music, it's always linked in the show notes. And this was taken from a great YouTube channel called Voices of Music, and they just promote good music. And this is one of the one of the recordings they have of a performance. So Vivaldi, one of the great Baroque, he was actually a priest. Yeah, he was a priest. So Vivaldi, there's a show we did with Massimo Scapin on the spirit of Baroque music. And it was great to talk about Vivaldi. So you are listening to the Terror of Demons morning show. I'm joined as always by the co-host and the author of the book, Kennedy Hall. How you doing, brother?
Living the dream.
Excellent. Still, that dream's still alive in Canada. Good.
It's man, it's an exciting time to be alive. It is simultaneously a very difficult but very exciting time because I don't know, with pressure and conflict comes a lot of opportunity. So we're just we got an election in 27 days, and Justin Trudeau's more nuts than ever, and the vaccine is on everybody's mind and all that kind of stuff. So lots of memorares going on up here. That's what we're doing right now.
Yeah. Well, let's pray for Canada, our neighbor to the north. Or if you're a Canadian, we'll pray and pray and do not worry. Is that what St. Padre Pio says? Pray and do not worry. Yeah. That's the quote. That's the meme I always see.
I think it's pray, hope, and don't worry or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's see. Where are we? It's the 13th Sunday after Pentecost. We had the Immaculate Heart of Mary commemoration on the Sunday. If you missed it, there were 2 collects and 2 post communions at Holy Mass. So let's see. We've got Saint Philip Benizi today. Saint Bartholomew tomorrow. We also have Saint Louis of France, the great king of France, on Wednesday. It's a great feast. And the greatest doctor of the Church Universal, in my opinion, St. Augustine of Hippo on Saturday. Definitely a great doctor of the Church. And Kennedy and I both, Augustine was critical in our conversion. Kennedy, I've never actually even heard the story of Augustine and your conversion. What did Augustine do for you?
Well, also, St. Augustine is featured in Family Be Damned, the big part in that book.
I don't remember that part.
It's just, there's the prayers, all the timing lines up. I use a liturgical calendar. So Saint Monica and
does it? I think I remember that now. Yeah,
it's just
a reminder. Family Be Damned, an excellent novel written by Kennedy. He published 2 books. While everyone was locking down in 2020, he published 2 books. Yeah. That's right. He wrote 2 books, published 2 books. One of them was this great novel, and we don't talk about it a lot, but it is a great novel. It's a wonderful story. Pick it up. It's It's really quite excellent. So, sorry, continue.
What I use the liturgical calendar for the conversion of the. It's a happy ending in the book. Okay, so you'll be happy when but you don't really know going through what's going to happen. But anyway, Saint Augustine plays a big part in the end because on a certain day at the end of August, one of the characters starts to have a change of heart because of certain events, and for that brief moment in time where that person gives permission to heaven to enter into his life for a minute, St. Augustine's on it. And it was my homage to the fact that Augustine was a convert and the character's going through a major conversion. But in my personal life, my biggest, our priest gave a sermon on compunction a few weeks ago. The proper feeling of sorrow for your sins, essentially. And it's a good feel. And it's not shame. It's not scrupulosity or something, but it's recognizing that the things that you've done that are bad, and that's a good feeling to have because it means you have your head screwed on straight. And one of the biggest feelings of remorse I always have is for intellectual pride. For whatever reason, all the things in my life that I've done, intellectual pride for me is just, I don't know, it just gets me the most. And I was intellectually very prideful before I was a practicing Catholic, and university degree. And, the thing is, listen, like I've always been this nerdy intellectual kind of guy, but when I wasn't on the right side of things, it was for the wrong thing. That's why I kind of look at it as the most damaging, I think. For all the sins that you commit, usually those sort of are relegated to you or one other person. But when you're teaching, or when you're in university, or when you're speaking, or I've always been doing things like this in some capacity. I was always speaking up in classes and lectures, and people would go to me for information. That was just always what happened with me. Well, you don't realize the extent of how damaging your sinfulness can be, your error can be, if that makes sense. So when I was coming to the faith back sort of for the first time, I immediately was excited about the Catholic intellectual tradition because it really is a gold mine. I mean, it's a diamond mine. It's there's nothing that compares.
Yeah.
So then when I got into it, I remember I was in a bookstore, actually in the city I live in now, the town, a bookstore that's pretty good. I mean, I haven't been there in 18 months because of 2 weeks of Slow the Spread, but it was a place that had Chesterton. It had old Western civilization kind of books as well as new books. It was a fun little niche store. And I went in the philosophy section, and I saw this thing on St. Augustine on the shelf, picked it up, and we were on vacation out in New Brunswick, visiting my wife's family. So this was 3 or 4 months before Titus was born. So about 6 years ago, 6.5 years ago, 6 years ago, I guess. And we're out in the river. It looks like a beer commercial out there. Like it's like if you put a 6-pack of mostly Canadian in the water, it would be a beer commercial. It's like rolling slippery rocks. And I mean, it's gorgeous. Evergreen trees and rivers and it's just sun glistening off the water and the mountains. It's picturesque. It's a beautiful, beautiful place out there. So we were out there, and I just brought the book with me. And I had
it was just a book about Augustine.
It was Confessions.
Oh, snap!
Yeah,
there it is.
Yeah, and yeah, yes, but part of it, reading about it, part of the effect was, of course, the his life. Sure, like the fact that he converted. That's a sort of an emotional thing, but it was his intellectual approach to explaining things. I didn't know I was an Augustinian until I read it, and then I've only read it once. I should read it again. I should. But just that one time reading it in that 3 weeks there or so that I read it, it just floored me. It just blew my mind. And then after that, I picked up some Aquinas, but I think that reading Augustine first was almost more important because it helped me make sense of the world in with philosophy, which I realized how much of a Platonist I was. I know you're not supposed to be a Platonist as a trad, you're only supposed to be in it, but for me it was really important, and especially the way that he spoke about there was one part in the book. It's been so long since I read it, but he talked about sort of how big the world was and how small you were, sort of thing. But how massive the mind is. He talked about the fact that you could contemplate a mountain and the whole thing was in there. For some reason, that just really got me, and I went, "Whoa!" It just was. The mind really was a very powerful thing, and with that comes a whole host of things. So that was really big for me. So Saint Augustine means a lot to me.
So were you some kind of agnostic when you started reading it?
No, I was. What's the dates here? So by the end of 2013, I started coming away from agnosticism. I was a Joe Rogan bro. I don't know how to explain it. Like just one of those new age mixed modern guys who I wasn't an atheist, but I wasn't religious.
Okay.
And then I started thinking about becoming Catholic or re-becoming Catholic, just various circumstances, going to teachers college, that sort of thing. And then I picked the book up in the fall of 2014, I believe, and I was going to mass. Okay. But I was a liberal Catholic.
Okay.
God forgive me. Then went to Mexico early 2015, major Guadalupe, changed my life, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Came back, and then I had that book that I hadn't read yet. And then it was like, okay, I should probably read this thing. And then so it was I was on the journey there.
That's sweet. Yeah. I read Confessions is what converted me from Protestantism on a fundamental level. I initially became Eastern Orthodox, but it was the big critical move from various Protestant heresies and etc. There's really not a book like Confessions in the history of the world. I mean, there's other books that are similar in some ways, but like you just said, I think that's the potency of Confessions, is that there's other autobiographies of the saints, but this Confessions is so potent, so personal, but also so immensely intellectual.
Yeah.
And he's constantly philosophizing in the presence of God. It's like it's like a philosophical prayer.
Yeah.
And I mean, just if any listeners have never read the Confessions, this is how it begins. This is the first page. Can any praise be worthy of the Lord's majesty? How magnificent is his strength, how inscrutable his wisdom. Man is one of your creatures, Lord, and his instinct is to praise you. He bears about the mark of death, the sign of his own sin, to remind him that you thwart the proud. But still, since he is a part of your creation, he wishes to praise you. Grant me, Lord, to know and understand whether man is first to pray or to you for help or to praise you, or whether he must know you before he can call on you as aid. So he starts to pray. It's what's so beautiful to me is that what struck me in the same intellectual pride. This is also my own vice. It's the burden of many men, I think, and it's the downfall of many men. And I think when you read Augustine humbles everybody because his intellect is, in 3 more ball games or ball fields above yours. It's awesome just because he is just filled with such humility. It's really nothing like it.
Intellectual pride. It gets, I don't know. It's like forgotten about nowadays. I mean, this whole thing we're going through right now is all, I mean, I don't know if intellectual pride's the whole of it, but it's a big part of it. I mean, the fact that we live in a world where someone says, I'm not a scientist or I'm not a doctor, so I can't have an opinion. It's like, it just shows that we just accept intellectual pride as a baseline. We just accept the fact that we rely on these experts for everything, and it's like, oh, I can't have an opinion that the experts don't have. It really is just an incarnation of intellectual pride of, there's a class of men who are the smartest, and none of us dare touch them with a 10-foot pole because we can't deign to touch their intellect. I mean, it's almost like we've exported this intellectual pride and placed it on a priestly class of people, which Augustine, coming from a Manichaean coming from a Manichaean background, and being a philosopher and a rhetorician, whatever you use the word would be, basically a public philosopher. I mean, the fact that he was from that class of people that were basically sophists, and they were using logical games to propagandize the public, I guess you could say, in a way. I mean, really, that's what it was. It's very much a remedy for what's going on right now. I think everyone should read Augustine, read Confessions. It really is.
Yeah, it'll really change your life. It's changed my life. It's changed Kennedy's life. We definitely recommend it. It's a classic for all time, definitely.
And just from a fellow trads, I mean, Aquinas was basically an Augustinian. So
definitely.
So it's like
there's a problem among trads where Thomism, that's what we've dealt with on the show. There was the issue before Vatican II where the Thomists were way too ideological to the point of sort of excluding an Augustinian type of framework, and that's what was being restored with people like Dietrich von Hildebrand.
Yeah,
and you need to make room for that as well. I would definitely, if I had to choose and choose a side, I would definitely be an Augustinian as opposed to a Thomist as well. So, this is the restoration of the rival schools, which is what we try to do at Meaning of Catholic. Is we're trying to restore this debate between these different schools of thought, because that's what brings about Christendom in the greatest intellectual sense of the term. But let's get into our topic. But before we do, the Meaning of Catholic, we are going to be starting a new show soon, and that is going to be an off-the-record version of talking more about current events, politics, but mainly things that we can't talk about on YouTube. And this is going to be for patrons only. This is going to be twice a month, and it's going to feature the commentary of Jeremiah Bannister. And if Kennedy has any time after he's done with his 3 jobs that he's currently working, hopefully he can join us as well. But this is going to be for patrons only, because it will be totally
too spicy.
Totally spicy. So we're going to talk about the V word. We're going to talk about the P word. We'll even talk about the J word. And if you want to know what all those cuss words mean, become a patron. And
not the other one, not that one, another one, the politics one.
So we're going to be talking more off the record. And the good thing with this show is that it'll be patrons only. So it'll be more a conversation, really, a private conversation, basically, with patrons. Because when we do these shows, we don't have as much time to talk with the audience and talk amongst ourselves. But this show is going to be far more of a private conversation. So you can ask your questions, give your comments, and we'll be talking more about that. So it'll be happening twice a month. The first one will be next week, and we'll be talking about Afghanistan and all of that nonsense. And lots to talk about with that, as well as other important topics. So if you become a patron, you'll have access to that. Go ahead, Kennedy.
What platform are you going to use to stream it? Is there like a Patreon thing?
Yeah, so it'll be on Patreon. So if you're on Patreon, you're a patron. You'll get notifications of the posts. So we'll post when the stream is scheduled, and then so you'll be able to jump on the stream and the chat through Patreon. So the link will be when you log into your Patreon account, you'll have the link when you access the posts.
So it's a non-YouTube thing then.
We haven't decided yet.
Okay. Well, I guess you could do a private YouTube.
Yeah, but, we'll see what the capabilities of YouTube are to censor various topics. We'll test the limits and see what happens.
Yeah. This Wednesday on my radio show, speaking of, well, it's not too spicy or anything, but one thing I wanted to talk about for a while. I'm obviously a big Chesterton nerd, and G.K. Chesterton speaks very favorably of democracy and liberalism in a different way, but I'm having Joseph Pierce on.
Oh, awesome. Joseph Pierce is awesome.
He's the best.
That's exciting.
Well, yeah, I want to talk to him about that because I can feel it in my gut. I know what Chesterton means about liberalism. I know what he means about democracy. But obviously that's liberalism in a certain sense. It's obviously an error. And in another sense, democracy is an error. So what is it that Chesterton's getting at? How do we formulate that? And so Joseph Pearce is going to come on. Because you wouldn't call Joseph Pearce a liberal, so
certainly.
So he's going to talk about that on Wednesday at 4:00. So
that sounds like a great show.
Yeah.
And that's the complexity of what we've tried to bring out also in this show, is that there is a sense of what I would call just republicanism in terms of government. There's a sense of that's entirely orthodox, and that's what makes this complicated. It's what makes our time period complicated. So anything else coming down the pike you want to promote for this week, Kennedy, in terms of LifeSite, Crusade Channel?
Oh, LifeSite, just check the articles. I mean, I got 2 or 3 a day going up right now. We just sort of bang them out. Lots of news. If you want to know what's going on in Canada, we're really pushing our Canadian journalism right now because it's a gold mine in a weird way. So lots of that. And then the radio show, just check it out Monday through Friday, 3:00 to 6:00 Eastern on the Crusade Channel. And it's actually because of all this, fourth wave stuff we're all going. I mean, it's, things are kind of heating up politically as they do come the fall. And so we're doing it's free right now for a time. You can just go to the website, listen, and it will be a free stream. If you like it, you can sign up. But it's sort of a public service helping people get through this whole, there's just so much information. You need to find a place where you're getting the truth, because you're going to hear about it at work or at your parents' house. It's going to come up. Let's be honest. You just want to know what's going on. You wish you never had to. And maybe you should check out of the world and become Catholic Amish, and maybe that might be better for all of us. But if you can't do that, you got to know what's going on, because people are going to talk to you about it. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the things that we want to expand with Community of Catholic, is talk more about the logistics of becoming Catholic Amish, because definitely in my book, I advocate that we need to start building Catholic cities and Catholic villages and Catholic communities that are completely separate from the economic and political structure of modernity, which has been stained with the blood of children and all sorts of other wickedness. Yeah. At the same time as Catholics need to continue to be salt and light in this wicked world as well. It needs to be both and.
It's a paradox. My son, Titus, for some reason, he just has a devotion to St. Philip Neri now, out of nowhere.
Oh, nice.
Well, he saw a picture of him in a saint book that we have, and he's holding like a flaming heart or something. And Titus is like, he's got the fire heart. What's this guy? And he's asking about St. Philip. He's like, Dad, we have to add St. Philip to the rosary every time. Pray for us, whatever. So I love Titus, but he's working on his obedience to his parents. And St. Philip Neri, that's even in this small biography, it's, he was characterized by sanctity by the age of 6 because of his obedience to his parents. I'm like, you hear that? Start imitating this guy. And, but he's the patron of Rome. And I'm trying to explain what Rome was to Titus. I'm like, well, you're actually technically a citizen. I mean, by extension of your father from that country. I don't know if you'll ever get to go there, and who knows what's going to happen. But it struck me. I'm like, oh yeah, Catholicism is very urban in a sense. I mean, like Rome. I mean, think about it. I mean, talk about a city. Okay, God baptized the city of cities, and that's so. On the one hand, yes, are we called to escape the urban life? Yeah, but on the other hand, Catholicism is civilization, and civilization is buildings and is roads and is the complexity of urban life in the best sense of the word. So it's paradox being Catholic. You might be stuck in the middle of downtown Toronto and have to civilize and Catholicize your little apartment or what, complex or something. On the other hand, you might need to get the heck out of Dodge and save your soul and go out where the trees and rivers are, because that might be necessary too. It's always been both in the faith. That's the thing about Catholicism. It's both and. There's no one way.
Totally. Yeah. It's so that's excellent. I'm gonna share your article from LifeSite in just a second. One more announcement, and that is today at 4 p.m. we'll have a special premiere on Community of Catholic on the topic, what is the authority of Vatican II? Obviously a very complex and important topic. So that'll be premiering today at 4 p.m. Eastern time. And then we're going to have a patron-only discussion on that tomorrow at 9 a.m. So that'll be a discussion about Vatican II, once again in private discussion. So we'll just be talking with patrons about that. And then Thursday night, we'll have Michael Lofton, 7 p.m. Eastern time. That'll be called Disagreement. Does the Pope have the authority to suppress the Latin Mass? So Michael and I will be discussing that. We both disagree on the topic. And so that'll be a fun conversation, though. Lots of good things to discuss, both historically and currently. And then we'll have another patron-only discussion about general Latin Mass stuff the next day. So
you're finally going to solve Vatican II. You're going to do it for all of us, right?
Perfect. We're going to solve Vatican II. So become a patron if you want to solve Vatican II.
It's over. Catholic solved it.
So yeah, we'll have 2 patron-only streams coming up Tuesday 9 a.m. and Friday 9 a.m. One on Vatican II and the other one on the Latin Mass controversy. If you didn't see it, we had a big discussion on a disagreement with Chris Plants last week. So we're gonna have another one that's a little bit deeper topic with Michael Lofton this Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern time.
Cool.
So without anything further, let's see. Here is Kennedy Hall's. I just put this to the live chat. This is your report on what was said by the Roman Pontiff. Now, Kennedy, let me first ask you this, because you're now a journalist. You're not just an essayist. You're now a journalist. And one of the things I hate is when, first of all, the fact that, as I think you mentioned this before, 100 years ago, 150 years ago, in 1870, when the papal infallibility and supremacy was being dogmatized, there was a point where this was actually just when the newspapers were starting to become a thing. Newspapers itself, the press was becoming a thing. But now we've got every single papal homily, address, comment, off the cuff. When the Pope sneezes, we get a news report about it. And so one of the things I hate is that, there's all this context of that. And obviously the Pope is speaking in Italian or some other language. And then we get this little English snippet that says, oh, he said this and this and this. And I'm like, well, okay, that sounds weird, but there's already like 3 levels of translation getting to me. So I was like, how am I even supposed to deal with this? So how do you deal with this as a journalist when you deal with the Roman Pontiff saying X, Y, Z? And I acknowledge that sometimes what he says is weird, obviously. And as you said in your article, sometimes he has the odd Orthodox comment. But I have this problem with reporting on these little snippets that without any context. So how do you deal with that, Kennedy?
Okay, well, the first thing about LifeSite, because every journalist has a bias, obviously. You live your life with bias. You discriminate between various choices. That's how we live our lives. No one should pretend. This is one of the big myths of liberalism, is neutrality. There is no such thing as neutrality in a sense of values. Okay, like I'm biased towards virtue, and I'm biased against vice. That's just that's a thing. So with good journalism, in order to be fair, you want to make sure that you obviously have the facts, okay, for real. So at LifeSite, there's a team of editors, and there's 3 or 4 that I deal with two directly. No, 3 plus John Henry Weston. He's been in it along. Everyone's editing, and we make sure that our sources are correct, and we have correspondence in Europe, and I myself am fluent in Italian, so I can check things if I need to, and we just make sure that whoever's covering the various pieces knows exactly what they're doing. Okay. So it's a very professional operation that way. And then we do our best at LifeSite to just put forward the facts. It's like, here is exactly what the people said. We use their own words to tell the story. So in this article I did on Pope Francis and the 10 Commandments, it's not like there's no point in the whole, not that criticizing the Pope is evil or anything, but who cares? But I'm not going to go Pope bashing. It's just a waste of time. It's like, it doesn't serve anybody anything. So we're just reporting what the Pope said. It's going to circulate. That's kind of the weird thing, or the interesting thing about working for LifeSite, which I'm really inspired by the men, Steve and John Henry Weston, who started the place, co-founded, because we start every day with a really intentional staff prayer, Decade of the Rosary, and a consecration to the Blessed Mother. And like, it really is a special thing. We recognize that it's God's work and that there's nothing we can do to save the church on our own. That's not the point. But we recognize that we're just called to fight, and this is an information war, and we just do our best to be in it. We always check out on the weekend. It's not like we're sitting there on our smartphones and doing things Saturday, Sunday. We're Christians. We got to, But anyway, so we really fight as hard as we can. We recognize that it's bigger than us. So our mentality is, people are going to get information. It's going to be shared. That's just the world we live in. Let's do everything we possibly can to work that in the favor of the good. So with Pope stuff, we try to be very fair. We just take his words as they are, and we compare them to things he's already said. So that way people can at least get the whole truth about it, because they're going to talk about it. So with Pope Francis on the 10 Commandments, this is not the first time he has said interesting things about the 10 Commandments. And so last week, he said he was doing one of his Wednesday audiences. And he said, about the commandments, I observe them, but not as absolutes. And that's what he said. Now, the context of that was, he does this about once a year, actually, the Pope, once every year or two, is he gives almost like a series of homiletics or something like that on the 10 Commandments. And classic with Pope Francis, some of it he says is totally fine. I mean, it's just sort of maybe a little fluffy in my opinion, but it's not as if he's out there preaching some sort of condemned heresy, technically speaking. It's just sort of the way Pope Francis talks. It's very psychological. It's very modern Jesuit, let's be honest, right? And he set up a dichotomy of, do I live in fear that if I don't do this or that, I will go to hell? Do I disregard or despise the commandments? Just no, I observe them, but not as absolutes, because I know that what justifies me is Jesus Christ. A little bit of a problematic statement. Are we justified by Christ? Obviously, in a sense, like, of course, but this idea that I not necessarily, the idea that I wouldn't follow the commandments and could still be justified, that's a very Protestant Lutheran mentality. That's and that was sort of the way that he finished the homily. It was sort of, that's it, drop the mic and I'm going to leave the stage. So there was no context given by the Pope about, well, what does it mean to be justified by Jesus Christ? Are you saying that you don't have to follow the commandments and that you still will be justified, sort of thing? So we looked through, I looked through things he had said before. And a week before, he spoke about the Mosaic Law. And he did something which I think was sadly a little bit confusing for people. Because in this statement, he talked about the law of Moses. And the way he put it to the audience, basically, he said that the law includes the 10 Commandments and also the laws of Moses. So he had this idea, the way that it was put forth to the audience was the law, meaning the law of Moses, which, yes, and there's a lot of the law of Moses that's no longer binding because it was part of an old covenant. Obviously, we don't follow the ritual laws of the Jews. We don't have to do that. But the 10 Commandments, although part of the revelation to Moses, they're not part of the law of Moses in the old covenant sense. It's not as if the 10 Commandments are on the same level as prohibitions against shellfish, so that was the way it was put to the audience. So when Paul speaks about the law, he's normally referring to the Mosaic Law, the law given by Moses, the 10 Commandments. That's what the Pope said. So it was very confusing. Oh, the Mosaic Law is the 10 Commandments. Partially true, yes. 10 Commandments revealed through that moment with Moses, of course. But the 10 Commandments are a divine law. They're an eternally binding set of precepts. Adultery is never okay. I mean, we understand these things, I think. So this is something that Pope Francis has done before, not just this year. But he said a similar thing in November of 2018, where he said the law was formerly seen as a series of prescriptions and prohibitions, but according to the Spirit, it became life. The Pope explained that this meant that the Ten Commandments were no longer norms, but that the very flesh of Christ who loves us, seeks us, forgives us, consoles us, and his body recomposes communion with the Father, communion that was lost through the disobedience of sin. Kind of confusing. What he's trying to express, I think, is, again, I think he's conflating the Mosaic law with the divine law. And, of course, we know that the law is dead. St. Paul talks about this. You can't work your way to heaven, and the law on its own is meaningless, okay? But the Ten Commandments, again, are not just the Mosaic law. And then there is a host of Catholic teaching that suggests something very different than what the Pope said.
This is
There's a hard one.
Well, let me cut in here if I may. I just looked up the excuse me. This brings up a very critical thing about Protestant history, which Catholics don't know about because they're not Protestants, thankfully, or they're not grown up Protestants like I, which I want to just bring up, and that is something that's a very good thing that's happening among Protestants right now. There's and on the point that you just made, there's a really, really critical essay that we're going to post on 1 Peter 5 in a couple hours. Actually, it's on the morality of criticizing the Pope, and it's a very, very technically theological article on the morality. It's by
Who wrote it?
Michael Cirilla, one of our contributing editors. He's out of Franciscan, Pseudoville, and he makes a very critical argument that is very important for us to look at today. So that's coming out on 1 Peter 5. We've got other stuff coming this week. So stay tuned for that. Very important anniversary coming this Friday, actually, that many don't know about. So that'll be coming too. But I just looked up the general audience that you mentioned on August 11. And he says, like you said, he says when Paul speaks of the law, he's normally referring to the Mosaic law, the law given by Moses, the 10 Commandments. It was relationship to thee, it was a preparation, etc., etc. So this is the type of precision which is dangerous, or the lack of precision, which is dangerous, because this is what's happening. So basically, Luther was condemned in Exsurge Domine 1571, and one of his condemnations was the proposition that in every good deed the just man sins. That was a teaching of Luther. The teaching of Luther was that everything you do is sinful, period. You simply cannot observe the commandments. You're going to just sin every single time, because he misread St. Paul in exactly the way, at least it implies, the Roman pontiff here is implying that the way that Luther read St. Paul was correct. Yeah. At least by implication, because what the Pope Francis is saying here is saying when Paul refers to the law, he's referring to the 10 Commandments. That's exactly how Luther misread St. Paul. Yeah. And that's what led him into his errors, because Luther read St. Paul, and St. Paul says things like the law will not justify you, for example. Yeah. And what St. Paul is referring to in context is, of course, the observance of the whole Mosaic law, particularly the ceremonial customs. Yeah. Because the controversy at the time was, should you be circumcised to be saved? That was the controversy, is that Gentiles have to observe the full Mosaic law, including the ceremonial precepts, or they will not be saved. And St. Paul's saying the law will not justify you, meaning circumcision will not justify you. Eating kashrut will not justify you, etc., etc. And these are ceremonial precepts. The Mosaic law is divided into 3 different types of precepts. There's the ceremonial precepts, the judicial precepts, and then, like what you just said, Kennedy, the divine and natural precepts, which is the 10 Commandments. So the critical misreading. So this is the good thing about Protestantism that's happening right now. It's called the new perspective on Paul. This is a controversy among Protestants that's happening right now. It's been happening for the past few decades. The new perspective on Paul is put forth by an Anglican scholar. His name is N.T. Wright.
Yeah.
And the new perspective on Paul is basically looking at St. Paul and looking at the context and realizing, hey, Luther and the other reformers, so-called, actually misunderstood these verses.
Yeah.
They took them to mean the law cannot justify you, meaning all good works in general. But when you take it that way, you end up contradicting St. James's epistle. And that's why Luther didn't like St. James' epistle. And he thought it was an epistle of straw with no sense of the gospel in it.
Yeah.
And the new perspective on Paul is this huge controversy. So you have big Protestant figures like John Piper. He writes against N.T. Wright. But this is something that's debated among Protestants. And what leads many Protestants to become Catholic is because they read the new perspective on Paul. The new perspective on Paul is basically just the Catholic perspective on Paul that they have discovered by just researching it more, which is what a great grace for the Protestants is that they just discovered Catholicism by researching St. Paul more. They've studied the Bible a little bit more. So now they're becoming Catholics.
I never understood, man, even when I was an idiot, like I was I don't know, liberal Catholic, I guess. I remember reading St. James and being like, duh. I mean, faith without works is dead. It just was it was just like, how on earth could how could I say that my works don't matter if the Bible says the opposite? It was just very simple to me. But I wasn't coming from.
Yeah. One of these things is the only place where the Bible says, the biggest Protestant doctrine is faith alone, right? The only place that the Bible says faith alone is when it says not faith alone.
I know.
I mean, it's like, just read more of the Bible, Protestants, and you'll become Catholic. It's great. You
know what's funny? There is a movement amongst Protestants. I mean, there's lots of movements amongst Protestants, and I'm not hating or anything. Some of the greatest allies we have in Canada right now, for reasons of conscience, etc., there's a really good document put out that Catholics can perfectly use because it's completely orthodox. It's just biblical about conscious objection to this certain medication, and it's put out by a bunch of these Protestant pastors, and you can use it's a legal document. It's great. It's actually wonderful. Anyway, there's no hate on me. There's no hate I have in a sense of not going to work with people of goodwill. But I've never understood like the intellectualizing. I've thought, there's just so many verses in the Bible that just contradict the position. And it's very simple to me, I think. But it's funny, there's lots of different Protestant, back when I was trying to understand my faith more deeply, I was with a lot of the charismatics from Steubenville, and that was sort of my community. And obviously there's lots of sharing of Protestantism and charismatic renewal. It is what it is. But they always pick these Protestants that say really Catholic things. I think that's kind of how they justify it. So I was listening to Francis Chan, that pastor, and what's the pastor of the Bethel Pentecostal from California? I don't know.
I don't know.
Anyway, but they have these sermons, and I'm listening to these going, my goodness, this guy sounds like a Catholic should sound, and on really strange things. And I'm thinking, how can you get this part, which is very almost inside baseball Catholicism about certain things, but then just sort of stay with the worship band and on the stage and the potted plants as your decorations. I don't know. It's very strange.
Yeah. I think, and I read his book, Crazy Love, a while back to try to.
Who's that?
That's Francis Chan.
Oh, yeah.
But Francis Chan seems to, at least I saw headlines a couple, months ago or years ago when he came out in favor of the real presence.
Yes.
This is actually, so this is why we need to really reach out to Protestants to win them over, because they're actually becoming Catholic in droves now, because there's this movement which is associated with the new perspective on Paul. It's called the emergent church movement. And what this is that all these Protestants are reading the church fathers because they've had it with all these Protestant denominations. They're done with those. All those denominations, Lutheranism, Methodism, those are all shrinking and shrinking and shrinking because they're all divided over gender topics and ordaining women and all this nonsense.
Yeah.
And the mega churches, the big rock bands, they're actually, those ones are the ones exploding. So these big mega churches, but the problem is they have no roots. And so within a generation, all these people are going there as a stop on the way. And then they're leaving that and becoming high church, Anglican, Eastern Orthodox, or Catholic.
Yeah.
And that's the movement right now. This is, I mean, we should rejoice that this is, I mean, we're seeing really the twilight of Protestantism at this, at least, you know, in the West and North America and stuff. This is a very exciting time right now because there's so many Protestants who are just seeing the light. This is awesome. But I wanted to refer all viewers to there's an excellent exposition of the Protestant heresies by the great William Marshner of Christendom College. It's from Catholic Culture, and it looks like they uploaded it to archive.org. So Institute of Catholic Culture, please apologize. I'm sorry if this is not the link you wanted, but I couldn't find your link. But it's Institute of Catholic Culture, which is a great organization. You should join that organization. But I just sent a link to the chat. William Marshner, Protestant Revolution. That is an excellent trilogy of talks from Marshner, which really goes into the depths of this whole issue and the way that Luther believed and all of these errors about sin, the commandments, and really an excellent talk. And William Marshner is just a phenomenal, hilarious talk speaker in the first place. He's one of those like Chestertonian type scholars where he's a total genius and he's hilarious. So it's like entertaining. It's like entertainment at the same time as you're learning something. So check that out. So, so the 10 Commandments. And where do you want to go here, Kennedy? We were talking about.
Well, we got about 12 minutes left. We were going to talk about raising boys, as we do on this show. We ended up talking about 40 other things. But yesterday you were telling me that you had sort of started. Like we were going back and forth about what we should talk about today, and then you'd mentioned how you had taken your little boy into the gym with you or to the weight room or whatever. And we were like, okay, we should talk about raising boys and stuff. And I thought it was timely that in the church right now we're seeing, this is not the first time, but it got a lot of press from Pope Francis about the commandments are not absolutes. And it struck me as, one of the biggest problems that we have with our generation. We were millennials, like if we want to call us that, and younger especially, and I mean, it's been since the 60s, and let's be honest, probably before that, but is not viewing the 10 Commandments as absolute. Not just the binding moral principles are just not that. They're not binding moral principles to people, and that directly translates into how you raise your children and how you grow up into be a man, especially. And it's funny, as detestable as some of the things about the revolutionaries are, whether French or American or Soviet or whatever. The thing is why they're so attractive, these individuals, is because even though they were in error to varying degrees, depending on the revolution, some were worse than others, they believed in binding moral principles to the point where they would die for those principles. Back when I was a liberal agnostic, Che Guevara was very intriguing to me. Why was that? I didn't really know much about his politics, to be honest, but it's because the fact that he actually believed in something strong enough that he would go and get in a Jeep and go take over a Capitol building and die for what he believed. I mean, that's like, whoa, that's a big deal. That's an attractive quality in a man. And today we're living through a time where there's, I did an article basically reporting on a podcast between this woman who was, she was about 5 or 6 or something during the Holocaust, but she was a young woman and she escaped and whatever. And she's a medical rights advocate, activist and things. And she talked about how she looked around the world and she basically said, grown-ups need to act like adults and stop walking around like zombies. I thought it was a very astute commentary, I'm thinking, my goodness, I mean, how much more do you have to take before you're actually going to do something where you, not in the annoying, pseudo civil rightsy sense where everything is oppression. That's not what we're saying, but legitimately there are bad things going on, and you're just sort of like, oh well, I guess I'll just keep doing this for another 18 months. And it's like, it's actually very simple. Like if you just kind of did something about it, it would go away. This isn't Soviet occupation here. So anyway, we are raising our children in this malaise of moral indifference, and you can't do that and raise a good children at all. But especially young boys who, as the culture continues to devolve in certain directions, if you want your young men to keep the faith and to be good fathers and husbands, which they need to be, or priests or whatever they choose, they're going to have to believe very basic things like you never break the 10 commandments willingly. Obviously, mistakes happen, but they are absolutes. They are absolutes. It is never going to be fashionable to run away in battle. It is never going to be fashionable to cheat on your spouse. It's never going to be fashionable to just blow off going to mass on Sunday. It's not a thing. And you have to raise your children believing that. Otherwise, you've lost the battle.
There was you ever read the blog Art of Manliness, Kennedy?
I have before, yeah.
I really like it because it's very practical. It's got so many practical things, but it's got a lot of wisdom too. And it's basically like, I think the guy is Christian.
He's a Mormon.
Is he a Mormon?
Don't hold it against him. He's got good stuff.
That's funny. I mean, the blog itself is very good. It has a lot of good information, and it's never really. It's kind of like pro God in terms of like, we support you going to church, and that's about as much religion it talks about. But the rest of it is a lot of just practical wisdom and practical stuff. And one of the things I got on that when I was reading it years ago was directed to another author who talks about manliness. And he discusses that every man has to have his own non-negotiable, unalterable terms, his own principles that he lives by. And that is something that a man has to internalize himself, that he gets from his father. His father gives him those non-negotiable, unalterable terms. Ramos says, my son loves hearing stories about the saints so that they're basically his real life superheroes. That's a great, I love that. That's great. That's a great example. In fact, we just started a series at 1 Peter 5 on Saturdays on St. Alphonsus's Victories of the Martyrs. And that's, St. Alphonsus is, I think he's really the doctor of the church of the modern era. So much of his writings need to be more widely read. And I think that the Victories of the Martyrs really fires that masculine zeal, definitely. And when you have these non-negotiable, unalterable terms, that is what grounds a man in his principle. And that he is saying, I will live by these principles, do or die, and that's it. And then once you understand your principles, then you understand you can compromise on these other things. Because sometimes men have that same instinct, but then they kind of go excessive. And they're saying, well, I won't compromise on the color of the drapes or whatever. These sort of little things that are not, you can compromise with your spouse on that. That's not necessary. But then when you get those principles saying, I'm not going to compromise on this. And this is what makes, what fires a man's zeal. And this is what women want and need. They want their men to have principle, and they want to be non-negotiable. And even if your woman may, there's various things that might be non-negotiable that your woman might not like, for example, perhaps if you're married to someone or whatever. But that when you stand in your principles and you say, no, I'm not going to change my principles, that's something that women respect. And this is what women don't respect men, because men are acting like boys. And that's the problem. So acting like a man, part of that is having these principles and saying, I'm not going to negotiate on these principles because those are my principles, and that's it. But you just got to make sure your principles are the right principles. You can't go excessive. You can't be too extreme with your principles, but the Ten Commandments is the basic.
Well, that's what the Ten Commandments are for.
The basis of those principles. Yeah.
Phil Robertson, that Duck Dynasty guy, one of the things that he got kicked, their show got dropped or whatever years ago because he went out he said something way too politically incorrect about sexuality, right? Way too Christian. But he went viral with his own show. And one of the episodes, it was like a 3-minute thing of him saying, "Hey, America, let's try following the 10 Commandments for 365 days. He's like, can we do that? Can everybody just follow the 10 Commandments for 365 days? He's like, we transform society. It was true. It's like, let's just do that. Like, don't worry about religion. I mean, obviously it is, but just do that. You think it's, and Chesterton, he's one of his famous lines, one of the million of them. People believe that the faith requires you to believe a lot of different laws. And he says, no, you got to believe 10. And you can do anything you want outside of those 10. Talking about the 10 Commandments. It's actually very simple. Follow the 10 Commandments. Obviously, they expanded, and it's not that simple insofar as, I get it. There's things with the 6th and 9th Commandment that are simple, that are more complicated than that. But the point being is, if you could just do the 10 Commandments, you can do anything else, and it's very simple. Just follow those 10 Commandments. Don't cheat on your spouse. Go to church. Tell the truth. Don't gossip. I mean, don't steal, But this last year and a bit has been a testing point for me as a father with principles. I realized there were certain lines in the sand I was going to have to draw with what was happening for the sake of my children. And it's been very difficult at times to continue those principles about certain things to do with lockdown. And it's caused people to dislike me in some capacities. But I knew that this was a moment where my oldest son is coming of age in reason sense. I mean, he was 4.5 when this thing started. He's almost 6. That's a big leap cognitively for kids. It really is. I mean, we're going from toddlerish brain capacity to he's starting to ask about when do I go to confession and stuff, like a really big leap in this reason, really big. And so I knew that this thing wasn't going to go away anytime soon I just saw it. I just felt it in my gut. And I thought my son is going to come of his age of reason under lockdown. What am I going to do with that? It was really hard for me to contemplate, And I said, well, especially because we live in an urban environment, he's going to see what his dad is made of, and he's going to see what we are made of as a family and the decisions that we're going to make. So, thankfully, by the grace of God, we've been able to stick to our principles for the last 18 months. And it's been one of the most fruitful things for my son, because it doesn't mean to criticize any other children or anything, but there's going to be a difference between kids like my son and how they've been raised this last little bit. And it's going to continue how they see the world and what they're ready for as they grow. I mean, we were talking to some very faithful Christian parents whose kids are in university and things, and they're really struggling with the mandates of the vaccinations and all this kind of stuff. And the kids know it's wrong. What are they going to do? They don't want to be ostracized. And they said, it's not that my kids don't know what's right. It's that we just weren't expecting this fight to happen. They're 20 years old and yes, they've been properly educated in things, but it's a whole other level to go and say, whoa, you've got to be not just they're used to being an outsider for their faith, but there's always a community for that. This is like, no. Even a lot of the faith is against you now. The communities of the faith are against you now because they're following the government and whatever. Are you ready to be ostracized from social engagement itself? It's like, that's a pretty hard thing to do for a 20-year-old. Let's be honest. Like, I don't know what I would have done. So it's been hard, but by the grace of God, we've stuck to our principles. And I know my children now are raised where this is going to be their reality. They're going to, hopefully it gets better. Hey, I hope it does. But if something like this comes up again, they'll know, I went through this as a kid. I remember, this is shaping them the same way going through war or something that's shaping kids. So principles are everything.
That's awesome. Yeah, this is definitely inspiring. I hope we could talk more about being a father because, when's your son's birthday?
October 11th.
This is Titus, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So he's almost okay. So Jack his birthday is January 22nd, and he will turn 6 as well.
Yeah.
So we have. So are you? Because I'm really excited about joining Troops of St. George. Are you? Shout out to Taylor Marshall. Great. One of my favorite things that Taylor Marshall has done is found the Troops of St. George. A wonderful thing that he did for the whole church. Do you guys have Troops of St. George at your?
We don't.
Your area?
Actually, we don't know. There's one in Vancouver. That's the only one in Canada or something. I think it's at an FSSP out there. But we're talking about it. I mean, there's a bunch of us dads in our early 30s and stuff.
Start a chapter, man.
So we'll start one soon.
I'm so excited. I can't wait. It's like I read about the manual. Like I think when Jack was like 1 year old, I read the manual of Troops of St. George. I was like, oh, I'm so excited for this.
Yeah.
So I've been waiting until he turns 6.
Yeah.
Oh man. So all right. Well, that's all the time we have. Well, I think to me the biggest thing that I'm trying to do by God's grace is to have my sons look to Jesus Christ as the perfect man, and ultimately the fighter who fights against the world, the flesh, and the devil, and conquers with the cross, and the manliness of the cross, and how this is the model of manliness, to give up your life for your spouse, to love your wife to the point where you give up your life for her, as Christ did for the church. And that's, to me, that's that critical piece of the light bulb with a young man, where he gets fired with that masculine zeal to die for his bride. And anything you want to say on that?
No, fairy tales don't have to be fiction. They can be real.
Yeah, I think when men get that zeal for a crusade, for an adventure, for something big, and they understand that the cross, that is the biggest thing that you can do as a man. And that's when, to me, that's when the man of God is finally made, is when you get the cross, and the cross becomes the center of your life as a man.
That's right.
So let's pray. Let's pray for all young boys and men, especially for priests, to die for the bride of Christ. They have vowed themselves as husbands to the bride of Christ, in a sense. And let us pray that the priests arise especially to defend the bride of Christ, but also for all fathers to raise their sons. Pray for Titus and for Jack, for our sons, that they may become men of God, and that we may have the wisdom to raise our own sons into men of God by God's grace. In nomine Patris et Filii Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in caelis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra.
Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitti nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Jesus is King.